Hey Emma,
Yes, Madelyn.
what do you call it when your business harvesting seafood is actually a cover-up for turning your catches into robo-hybrids that you can customize to do your bidding?
I don't know. What do you call that?
Front fishin'. Soul hackers. Hello and welcome to Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
I'm your soul like the fish, SOLE host, Madelyn.
I'm your front like the front host, Emma.
Don't you like front fishin'? I thought that was...
Front fishing was good. Yeah.
You didn't like soul hackers?
It took me a minute. Soul hackers.
Well, I just, I've been trying to level up my jokes lately. If you haven't noticed, listeners.
Uh-huh.
Ever since Emma was like, it's better when you at least change a letter in the name.
Did I say that?
Well, not exactly, but that was what I took away from your feedback.
I see.
So, I've been trying to do better. I feel like front fishing could probably be, front mission could probably use a fishing minigame. So, front fishing feels like a natural spinoff.
Yeah.
Anyway, listeners, if you didn't pick it up from the joke, which, who could blame you, really? But we're going to be talking this week about Front Mission and Soul Hackers 2.
I believe there's not fish in either of them.
Not as far as I know. Not in more than a passing way.
Yeah.
They're on an island in Front Mission. Presumably they're eating some fish.
Maybe.
Potentially. They could be.
Possibly.
Unknown.
Yeah.
Well, then let's get in our wanzers. And let's dive in. Not literally, though, because we are not fish, and it is not a game about water or fishing.
There's
just
no fishing,
metaphorically.
To be clear.
It's Front Mission. Rhymes with front fishing. But it's Front Mission.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a tactical RPG developed by G-Craft, kind of in collaboration with Square, published by Square, that originally released in Japan only, in 1995, for the Super Famicom, aka the Super Nintendo Entertainment System.
Yep. I believe it was actually the first game not that Square published, basically.
That's what it sounds like.
Pitched to them by an outside company, and it was the first game that they got on board with through that sort of method.
That pitch sounds like it was challenging.
Yeah.
There are some great interviews, archived interviews with the creators of Front Mission that you can find by looking through the Wikipedia citations if you want to find them. But yeah, I really liked how much they emphasized, they told him, no robots. Mm-hmm. No robots. I like that as a design ethos.
Yeah.
I think more companies should have a design ethos that just boils down to know something.
It's interesting, though, because the reason they eventually were like, okay, maybe, was they did come around on robots.
Yeah.
They were like, oh, well, maybe working on a new genre would be cool.
Yeah. They were like, actually, maybe the team needs some experience with robots.
Yeah, maybe we should get into robots, I guess.
Could be our robot era.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's weird to think about now because, of course, Square publishes roughly endless amounts of games that then fail to meet their expectations.
We released 15 games in the span of 3 months. Why did all of them fail to meet our expectations?
Why could it be?
I have no idea why this happened to us.
So it's weird. It's both weird to think about a little bit of a Square, obviously pre-Enix here, but a Square pre-being a publisher, and a Square pre-doing anything but fantasy.
Yeah.
Really anything but Final Fantasy.
Yeah.
So it's, it is funny to be like, oh yes, wow, the stretch for them was they were going to do sci-fi.
I mean, that's a jump, you know?
It definitely is. It just feels a little quaint. The discussion around it, I was like, oh, this is cute. Like, the thing you're debating is whether or not you want to make a robot game instead of a wizard game.
You know, apparently, by the time they got into it, Sakaguchi, Hashimoto, big names at Square and Square Enix, were actually really into robots, personally. So
Hashimoto, best known around here, of course, as the man who got in the elevator at Disney.
Yeah.
And pitched Kingdom Hearts.
Yes.
Also, like, ran the Final Fantasy brand for, like, a long, long time. But,
yes.
like, best known as the Kingdom Hearts elevator guy.
Big guy. Big guy doing big stuff.
He could have pitched, like, Disney robots, but instead he pitched Disney Final... Like, it could have been, in an alternate universe, it could have been Front Mission Disney. Like a mecha Goofy. Goofy in a mech.
It's coming soon.
I guess when Star Wars comes in.
I mean, there's the mechs in that original world, right? In the Toy Story thing, so.
Yeah, oh, that's true. You're right.
Anyway,
man, that's
anyway.
Hilarious. That would be hilarious if we're... Anyway, sorry, I won't go off on this. It's like, wow, I would love for Verum Rex to just be like, oh, actually, Front Mission. Verum Rex.
No, but Front Mission was originally the brainchild of Toshiro Tsuchida, who we probably talked about when we talked about Arc the Lad. He's also the creator of that as well, after Front Mission. And has artwork by Yoshitaka Amano, of course, the very iconic Final Fantasy illustrator, who they talked about in a few interviews of, like, this was very outside of Amano's wheelhouse, and also we made him draw way more than he ever did for a Final Fantasy title.
They were also like, we asked him to draw some of them happy, and he told us that wasn't really his thing.
It's not really his thing.
He did his best.
I did look at one of his mech illustrations, though, even though he doesn't do that, and it is rad as hell. So, good for him.
There is some freaky, moody concept art for this. I feel like if you read any article on Front Mission that is sort of like backwards looking, a lot of them will include like at least one piece of the artwork. So like you'll get the vibe. They're like scary. They're like scary. I just mean like they have scary energy. They have ominous energy.
Yeah.
And also Yoko Shimomura soundtrack.
Yes.
Alongside... Is that how you choose old games now? Do you just like go through her discography and go like, here's one we haven't talked about?
Alongside Noriko Matsueda, who did such works as The Bouncer as well.
The Bouncer.
Yeah.
I like that for Shimomura there was an anecdote that like she was super busy with some kind of other soundtrack, but at some point she ran into the company president and she was like too embarrassed to turn down the job in front of him, so she didn't.
Oh no.
Which feels very cultural.
Yeah, it does.
Like, I mean, whatever, I get it.
I don't know. You say that, but also that sounds like I'd do that too.
No, I agree. I said that and I was like, but like also I would do that.
Yeah.
So it feels both very cultural and also very universal.
Yes.
Anyway, we should probably talk about, like, okay, what is this game a little bit? So, in Front Mission, like we said, it's all about these, like, mecha pilot guys, which we're gonna, in this game, I feel like every game's gotta have a different name for their mechs, right?
Yes.
We don't talk about that as much as with zombies, right? But I feel like it's I guess zombies are sci-fi too, right?
Mech as a word, which is its own like abstraction of robot anyway, does actually come up more than zombie does.
That's true. There's not quite the moratorium on mech as there is on zombie in any given zombie game. But it is funny to be like, but like they can't really be called mechs. Like they have to have there has to be some kind of other name for them, even if we're allowed to use that word. And here they're wanzers.
Yes,
which I like.
They come from I guess it'd be Wanderpanzer with a V because it's German, which is walking tank in German. which is kind of characteristic of the way they design these mechs. Of they are very solid in comparison to like more like super robot-y stuff that you might have also seen at this time.
Yeah. More tanky, a little less Gundam-y.
Yes.
So in these games, so the first one came out in 1995, right? And there's a whole... Look, I'm going to try to summarize some of the lore for game 1, but Front Mission seems to have a whole lot of story. That was the impression that I got.
Well, it is a serialized narrative, yes.
Yeah.
Although it takes place, like, each of them take place in their own, like, distinct part of the future, so I don't think it's, like, a direct, like, oh, you follow these characters in each one. It just, they take place in the same world, essentially.
Right. All I meant was that in reading about the game, it was like, oh, like, this is a universe. Which I admit was not exactly what I expected from my mid-90s Robo-Tank game.
Why?
I don't know. I just sort of feel like usually the first game is like, like, it's short, and who knows, and I don't know, it's square, so I was like, these won't be connected to each other. But then they had a lot of story and of lore. So anyway, to give you a taste of that lore, the game's set in 2090 on an island called Huffman Island, which is like just southwest of Mexico, that was created by a volcano in 1995, conveniently when the game was released. But in 2020, and we'll all remember this, right? We'll all remember when this happened in 2020, the United States of the New Continent, which is like the futuristic government governing the unified North and South America, decided to try to take over the island from the United Nations. And around the same time, the Oceania Cooperative Union, the OCU, forms, and they want the island too. And there's some war in 2070, and there's peace for a while, and there's more war in the 80s, and then the game picks up with tensions flaring in 2090 when you, OCU Captain Royd Clive, which is such a video game name and is not his name in my demo, I have to say. Anyway, you have orders to investigate like a weapons factory, but when you get there, you're ambushed and your fiance is killed by an officer called Driscoll. And things get bad, war breaks out, you're discharged from the army as like causing the war even though you were set up. And then a year later, you join the Canyon Crows, who are some mercenaries who are working with the OCU to make them not suck so much.
Mm-hmm. The PlayStation and DS versions, which the DS version was localized and brought over here in like 2007, essentially. Yeah. Which was like, I think the first time Front Mission was brought over here, maybe?
I had read that one was the third one. I think
really?
It may have been Front Mission 3 was the first one.
Yeah. Oh, yes, you're correct. Front Mission 3. But it was the first time the first game was brought over here. There's also a second scenario around Kevin Greenfield that you can also play that gives you like more of a full understanding of like the story as a whole, essentially.
He's on the other side.
Yeah.
Anyway, you'll be glad to know that you get to choose your character's last name and their call sign.
You gotta, when it's a 90s game, you gotta. I think it's illegal.
Right?
Yeah.
Which is good, because, like, look, Royd Clive, it just doesn't get more, like, this is a video game made, well, I don't know. Royd is Japanese in the game, or, like, is, like, at least sort of semi-from Japan, so, I don't know. But Royd Clive feels like a very, someplace not America is making a game about America, and they're gonna have a guy who has a name.
That's American.
Yeah.
It does a little sound like that, yeah.
But anyway, his name is Royd McRobo.
Good.
In my game.
You gotta have the Mick in there.
I mean, you have to. It's my brand.
It's your call sign, you might say.
Well, the call sign though, I thought people were going to be saying this, and so like maybe I should have done it. I feel like I should have done it the other way around in hindsight. The call sign is just the thing that comes up on the screen when you're fighting. It's like your robot's name, kind of. But my call sign is my dude.
That's a good call sign for a robot.
I know, but I thought people were going to be saying it in the dialogue.
Me and my dude here.
They're talking about McRobo all the time. They never talk about my dude. So I feel a little bit like, disappointed. For context, folks, so to understand, Madelyn, how are you playing this game that released Japan only in 1995, and then for the Nintendo DS, which you don't have, in 2007?
Soon to the DS, soon to forever perish in like a week from now, by the way.
Yes, everyone is obligated to smash your DS.
Yeah.
In March. This game has been remade like many times, basically. Like they remade it for, I can't even remember what this system is called, some kind of Japan only handheld first. And then they remade it for PlayStation with like this new scenario with Kevin and like some updates. And they brought that version to DS, and that's when it came to the US. And then this fall in November, I think, they released like Front Mission First Remake. Is that what it's called? Something like that.
Yeah.
So that's available on like, at least on Switch. I don't know what other platforms it's on.
To be fair, this one is the only one I would call like a remake.
You're right.
Versus just like moving it to another system. Maybe with some added
maybe
content.
the PlayStation one. I know it's not a remake, but it's at least an expanded edition.
Yeah. That's fair.
So this is the remake of the expanded edition. And they just released like 2 or 3 days ago, like this week. So somebody was looking out for me. A demo of that. So if you're out there thinking like, I want to see if this kind of tactical, if this scratches the right kind of tactical RPG itch for me, you can try before you buy. And that's what I'm doing.
Yes. Square Enix, by the way, nothing to do with these remakes. They're making the first 3. They're remaking the first 3, all published by Forever Entertainment. The first one was also developed by Forever Entertainment. The second and third are going to be made by 2 other development studios, but also published by Forever Entertainment.
Interesting.
So each one has their own developer, which is why they might like. They don't, you look at like Front Mission First Remake and then look at Front Mission Second Remake and you're like, wow, these look different. That's why.
Yeah.
Not worse, just like not that, to me, neither of them look like, oh yeah, this one's like made by subpar or whatever. Just like, oh, it seems like there are different teams with different thoughts working on these.
Yeah.
And they were. So.
That's so, what a funky choice to make.
Well, because Front Mission Second Remake is coming out like
in June.
And I was wondering like, how are they doing these so fast? Because they announced like all 3 of them at the same time too during a Nintendo Direct. And it's because like Forever Entertainment is publishing all of them, but they're not doing all of the development work essentially. And that's how they're cranking them out so fast.
Well, that makes sense. Now, listener, I know you're out there. You're like, get to the gameplay. What is this game? What do you play in this game?
No, there's robots. It's tactical. Come on now. Use your brain, theoretical listener.
Fun little tricks, or fun in italics or in quotes, perhaps. Little tricks to that. So, I'm going to compare this to something like a Fire Emblem or a Triangle Strategy or something like that, right? So those games, right, you've got that little, like, you move your little squares and you can attack, right? And you've got close attacks, you've got ranged attacks, and all of that classic turn-based tactical stuff definitely happens here. Mm-hmm. But also, you get to do a lot of, between battles, doing a lot of customizing your wanzer. Right, so lots of different weapons you can equip, lots of different stat boosts you can equip, and if you can spend enough money, you too can make a powerful tank thing. But where the gameplay gets, if not really different, then really something, is that each wanzer has 4 modular parts. So it's got the body, left arm, right arm, and legs. Why doesn't it have left leg and right leg? I don't know. But it does.
Well, do you have different weapons on your arms?
You do.
You don't have different weapons on your legs.
What if I just want to destroy one leg, though?
I don't think that's that's very interesting. That's all I'm saying.
I know. I'm mostly
having the separate arms feels like there's something interesting gameplay-wise there. Having the separate legs doesn't.
I often agree. I agree that having separate legs in my life often doesn't feel like there's anything interesting gameplay about it.
Yeah.
So I get it. So basically, the thing that makes the combat here stand out a little bit, and at least according to some reviewers of the remake here, stand out in a way that can feel frustrating, is that each of those body sections has its own health bar. And you might be thinking out there, well, Madelyn, that's standard RPG stuff, right? Yeah, you kill the boss's arm, and you kill its leg, and you kill the other part, right? And, you want to target one of those and, try to take it out strategically. And now I say to you, listener, you can't do that. There's no targeting. There are certain types of attacks that are more likely to hit certain parts of the body, apparently, maybe. But your little pilot just sort of randomly is I'm going to shoot my gun at the right arm this time. Which, again, you might think, well, that's not a big deal if you have to destroy all 4 of them anyway. But you don't. If you destroy the left arm, right arm, legs, that has, movement and weapons ability effects on your enemy wanzer, or on your wanzer as well, if it happens to you. But the only thing that matters in terms of victory is destroying the body. So if you destroy the body in, 2 hits right away, even if you haven't hit anything else, you win. And it's a fun little upset. On the other hand, if there's, 1 enemy left on the map, and your pilots inexplicably will not aim for the body, you just have to keep trying until they do.
Sometimes you just want to torture the last enemy to death, I guess.
Look, sometimes you do. I respect that, right?
You're just feeling it.
I do that in Fire Emblem, the farm experience sometimes. I get it. Right? You want to chip it down, do chip damage as much as you can until everyone gets their experience. Of course. But sometimes you don't want to torture the last enemy. Sometimes you just want to win.
Yeah.
So that's it's a really interesting design decision, but it's also definitely one that shows the age of the game somewhat. Because I feel like that kind of element of randomness in gameplay is not something that people tolerate at all in the way that they did in the 90s.
Yeah.
It's also, okay, so I played, I don't think I've quite finished the demo. I think it says that there are 2 missions in the demo, and I'm sort of suspecting the tutorial mission probably doesn't count, but it's kind of unclear to me. So I played through 1 whole mission in the demo, which was reasonably fun. I also played through it in the remake. There's an option to play on the kind of fully upgraded version, or to play on the quote unquote original. And because I was doing it for the podcast, I chose original because I wanted to get the closest to the experience. The wanzers move really slow, really slow.
Yeah, if you're the not original moves faster. Apparently.
I suspected that. I do like their little animation that they do when they're jumping down steps, though. That was cute. I liked that. But yeah, I mean, it was fun, and I enjoyed it because I was oh, I like tactics games. This is sort of fun. But the randomness of it, and frankly, and I think the updated version of this deals with it too, but the lack of explanation really of this is a certain type of weapon. When I was preparing for the podcast, I read something that was melee attack always goes last in the order of attack. And I was really? That would have been good to know.
Have they fixed, one of the complaints I saw was that, the tracks don't really loop properly, the music tracks. Do they, fade out and then start again, or do they loop?
I'll be upfront that I played about 2/3 of the time that I played this game while I was on the subway.
Oh, so you weren't listening to it? Okay.
Well, I was listening to it, but I don't know if I would have noticed, it fades out and starts again. Because I didn't notice that happening, for what it's worth. But yeah, I mean, it's like an old game. It's an old game. That's my impression of this. It's a little hard, with that in mind, it's a little hard to recommend, at least from my perspective of playing it, because yeah, it definitely was sort of like, oh, this does feel a little bit random, whether I'm just gonna like destroy this thing right away or whether I'm gonna have to attack it like 8 times. And I'm not used to that amount of randomness in my games anymore.
Yeah.
But I don't know, maybe if I kept playing, I would like really get into the story. I could see that happening.
Yeah, from reading about it, it seems like a lot of Front Mission is like based on like the cinematic interests of the people creating it, sort of hit this in-between space between like Tom Clancy military thriller and Vietnam War movie. So it's sort of like in this in-between space between like this is really cool and like also this, no, it's not very cool. I was reading an article, there's a Vice article that sort of goes through like the history of the series, and talking about how like a lot of your protagonists are sort of adjacent from the military rather than actually being part of it, whether they're like vigilantes of some sort or like civilian groups of some sort. So that sort of like separates them a little bit, and there's a little bit more focus on like this sucks than like a more straightforward military thriller, depending on which one you're playing, of course. And there's a lot of ones that are like, and like 2 and I think especially 2 is like really timeline hoppy ambitious in terms of like jumping between what a bunch of different protagonists are doing. So I think the first one has like sort of most straightforward, simple story, and then they get more and more ambitious as they go along, to good and bad effects.
Well, notably, the first one sold like really, really well in Japan and was like really well reviewed. So don't take all us being like, well, people playing it now are like, this is a 90s game. Like it was.
Well, nobody thought that game in the 90s.
Right.
Oh man, this is such a 90s game.
What a 90s game. I did like that Hashimoto said, you know, they got people to playtest the game, and he was like, one thing that was surprising was that despite being a strategy game, and a robot game no less, 2 things that women are said not to like, we got a good response from our female playtesters. This is a review, like, contemporaneous with the game, so, to be fair. But I like that. I was like, man, women don't like strategy or robots. You're absolutely right.
They didn't know then that Gundam's female fan base would be so strong. They didn't know that women liked robots.
I read the synopsis for this game, and I really, my first takeaway was like, man, like, is this what being into Gundam is like? Like, you have to know, like, all of these different, like, faction names and, like, the whole history of their wars from each other. I was like, is this what Gundam is?
I think the main timeline, yeah. That is pretty much what it's like.
Love that.
Anyway, a couple more interesting points. I really liked the anecdote of talking about how they had Ko Yokoyama working on the robot designs, who apparently does a lot of models, like actual models.
Yeah, like plastic models.
Yes, and apparently President Sakaguchi, Square Hironobu Sakaguchi, loves plastic models. Of course he does. And he just really wanted to have models of the robots made. Which, to be fair, they look cool. They sure look like cool stuff. Like cool models.
Yeah. Look, if I was like a game president and I liked my little plastic models, like, you better believe that I would commission them.
Yeah, I saw like one picture of one of the models that Yokoyama made, and he said that he surrounded it with like dried out weeds from his garden. So it was in like a little nature scene. It's very cool.
That's so funny.
The other thing I thought was really interesting is technically the second installment of Front Mission is called Front Mission Gun Hazard. Came out the year after the first game, of course, one of those series where in the 90s they were releasing it like 3 a year or something. That's an exaggeration, yeah. But you know. It's actually a side-scrolling shooter RPG.
Oh.
So immediately after making the turn-based one, and probably they were already planning to make Front Mission 2, they were like, this world's cool, but what if it was a side-scrolling shooter RPG?
What if?
What if?
Probably ask that about pretty much any... I feel like more developers should ask that about their games.
The last installment in Front Mission Beyond the Remakes also was 2019's Left Alive, which I remember being announced and seeing a little bit about. Is technically set in the Front Mission universe, despite not being titled as such. And was also a huge failure, so... Not the resurrection of Front Mission that I assume Square wanted it to be.
Yeah, because notably before that, this was another one of these, this is so classic for the podcast these days, these like, it was abandoned for a decade series.
Yeah.
And now, only in the last 5 years, has there been some action around it again.
Yeah. Left Eye is funny because they brought in people from Front Mission. The main character designer is the Metal Gear character designer.
Yep.
The cover art looks very Metal Gear, if you look at it. And people who'd worked on Armored Core as well. So it was really like they assembled the mecha warriors.
Yeah.
And still, they did not go well. They assembled too many mecha warriors and tried to do a lot, way too much.
That sounds a bit like the plot of the game.
You're right.
Emma, I'll close with a question for you. If you were going to have a wanzer, like, what would you specialize in?
Like, what are my choices?
Like, would you want to be, like, a tank? I mean, not like they're all tanks, right?
Yes,
but
yeah,
like,
I know.
Like, how would you customize your stats?
I mean, in all games, I like to be very far away, so I assume I would be a ranged option.
Nice. A missile wanzer.
Yeah.
I like that. Well, on that illuminating note, Soul Hackers 2!
Yeah.
Did you play this?
I did. I played the first hour, because it was just added to Xbox Game Pass.
I should really get an Xbox, like, purely as an investment in the podcast.
You're gonna have to really think about this when Clickbait Boyfriend goes on his journey. Are you...
you make it sound like... What that sounds like in the context of the show is like Clickbait Boyfriend is gonna like he's going to become Link. Like the new Breath of the Wild is gonna come out and he's gonna like live it. He's gonna do like Breath of the Wild Go.
Yeah. No, I just mean you're gonna have to think about whether you need to budget for new game systems.
I know. I've been talking to him about this. I'm like, are you gonna have to get like all these like the Final Fantasy VII remake's gonna come out?
Yeah.
And like, is he just gonna like when he's back in the States like just gonna
just
gonna
do that
play games the whole time? Like he's just gonna come back and be like, all right, time to hang out with the PlayStation. Peace, Madelyn. Missed you.
Yeah.
No, I know. Should it be a game to decide how to handle it. Don't get me started thinking about it. And I'm thinking about our Netflix accounts and all of that. Anyway, it's Game Pass. You played the first hour. It's a 2022 RPG from Atlas.
Yes.
How was the first hour?
It was fine.
Nice.
Speaking of like big revivals, technically it's part of the Shin Megami Tensei series, which of course has been going on strongly with all of its various spin-offs for many years, but is technically related to, it's not really a sequel despite being called 2, but it's related to the DS title Devil Summoner Soul Hackers, Devil Summoner being one of the many Shin Megami Tensei spin-offs, and now Soul Hackers being like a sub-series within the Devil Summoner series. Don't think about it too hard.
I didn't think Devil Summoner, it's a DS game?
It was a DS game, Soul Hackers. Yep.
But not like originally, right? No, originally it was a Sega Saturn game.
Oh, well, whatever. I think of it as a DS game.
You're right. It was a DS game in 2012. But I have to shout out that it originally came out in 1997.
Yes, you're correct. Yeah.
Okay. I was like, oh my god, did the DS exist back then?
It did not. Stupid? No.
I was like, when did the original DS come out?
No, you are right. I just think of it as being a DS game.
Yeah.
Because that's where it is available for the next, 15 days. So if you want to play the first game.
Again, before Miyamoto shows up at your home
and takes your DS away.
Snaps your DS in front of you. Before... I know Doug Bowser's not with the company anymore, but it's probably just because, he was gearing up to snap everyone's DSs in half.
Yeah. Anyway, Soul Hackers 2 follows Ringo and her sidekick / partner, Fig, who are essentially, created agents of this, overseeing artificial intelligence called Aeon that sort of... It's basically like God, essentially. But, virtual. It's, overseeing what happens in the world and humanity. And a certain sequence of events has convinced Aeon that it has to take more direct action in the events of the world than it usually does. And so it's made Ringo and Fig, given them sort of robot synthetic bodies, and sent them off to actually intervene in the affairs of humans with their human-looking appearances.
Mm-hmm.
So basically the deaths of 2 people have apparently set in motion the end of the world. And so in order to stop that, Ringo decides to soul hack one of them, he's named Arrow, in order to bring him back from the dead. So essentially soul hacking is going in to their soul and hacking
hacking
to do what you want it to do, right? And in this case, she's like, live, Arrow.
To be clear, hacking like computer, not hacking with a cleaver.
Yes, not with a cleaver.
That was an alternate direction the joke was going to go, by the way. And I changed my mind.
Good to know. And then you're basically just trying to figure out what's going to cause the end of the world. There are these things called covenants that if you gather them all together, you can summon a god who will bring about the end, essentially. So now you're trying to collect the covenants before the bad guys can collect the covenants in order to prevent the end of the world. Gameplay-wise, it's basically, it's, as core, it's the same as any other, standard Shin Megami Tensei game you'll play. You have your demons, you have the skills that you can use. In this one, essentially, you equip demons to, your weapon, and then the demon that's equipped is the one whose skills you can use and affects what you are strong and weak to as well. So you use the demons to attack, and every time you hit a weakness, you build up a stack, and at the end of your turn, your stack turns into a Sabbath attack is what it's called, but it's essentially an all-out attack based on how many weaknesses you hit on your turn.
With loads of demons.
Yes. So all the demons go and they punch the people. Essentially is how it works.
Yeah.
It's very flashy combat system. It is a little bit honestly, when you get down to it, whatever, Shin Megami Tensei nerds will talk about their press turn system and how great it is. But essentially it comes down to just hit the weakness until it dies, right? In SMT and Persona. And this one is just hit the weakness until it dies.
Yeah.
With nothing else is sort of my impression of it so far. If you're playing on more difficult things for SMD and Persona, you might use blocks or buffs. Right now, I don't see the point of using those at all. I should just hit the weakness till it dies for the first hour or so.
That's how I play most games anyway.
Yeah.
Super effective, super effective, super effective. That's it.
Yeah. It's very stylish, though. If you're one of those people on Twitter that's like, man, I wish they would make a Persona, but that the cast were adults, here you go. They made it. They did it for you.
That's notable about both games this week, actually. I mean, obviously, one of the stereotypes about RPGs, that are made in Japan is that they are often about high schoolers.
Yes.
And neither of these games are about high schoolers, so It's Adult Games Week. Here.
Yes.
Talk this.
Yes.
I saw like both a lot of places saying like this is like Persona light, and a lot of places being like it's not Persona. Don't say that. So Emma, settled the debate.
I mean, it's definitely more technologically colored than Persona is typically. Persona is more fantasy, straightforward. Mm-hmm. So this one has more sci-fi colorings to it.
Yeah.
In terms of gameplay, I think it's pretty fair to say that, but I mean that's based on SMT in general, so that's not that astounding to compare it. Right. I mean, I don't know. It's not, but I don't think it's unfair to compare it to Persona or to SMT. It invites those.
It's literally a spin-off.
It is those.
So.
Yes.
Yeah. So this game came out. When did this? This was like near the end of the year, right?
Yeah, I think so.
And got pretty meh reviews overall. There are a few like people who love it reviews out there, but overall got pretty meh reviews. Like really very literally just being like this is fine, but it doesn't stand out. It's a little repetitive. It's basically just like almost the whole game is the Persona metaverse, basically. And not very much of the look, not to again have it be like, oh, every one of these games now has to be Persona 5.
Yeah.
Right. But it does, it really doesn't have almost any. I mean, it has a much, much, much less robust version of the social link system in that, like, it doesn't really have it. Like, you can hang out with your buddies at the bar and they have individual little mind palace dungeons, right? That you can get skills in. But it very much is like, it's the dungeon crawling part of this series.
Yes.
And not nearly as much of the other stuff.
I mean, that is more in keeping with how SMT is.
Right.
So I do think there is sort of this, like, people are very familiar with Persona 5.
Yeah.
On the whole. That's, part of SMT, so it's easy to be like, okay, it doesn't have the social link system. I think, at a certain point it gets into a problem where you're like, it doesn't have the social link system, so it's bad.
Right.
When, like, it doesn't feel like a good... it's complicated, right?
Right.
You can say, like, I wish I had more time to hang out with, like, the members of my party or whatever. But you have to be careful of being like, well, it isn't exactly Persona 5, so I don't like it. Yeah.
No, of course. And that makes sense. But it did raise something for me that was, or in reading the reviews, it raised an interesting point for me, which is, again, I mean, some places described it in sort of the more negative terms of Persona Light, right? But other places in a more, like, mostly neutral way, I think, referred to it as sort of a streamlined version of, like, an RPG, right? Or of these, I don't know. Are we not saying JRPG anymore? Is that gone now?
I mean, I don't think it's gone. It's just
okay,
like
a more streamlined version of these Atlas or whatever, like these like classic 100-hour RPG series.
Yes, it's not. This is not 100 hours, by the way.
Exactly. But the question that brought to mind for me was, for the audience of this kind of game, what percentage of those people... Sorry, I know there's no actual answer. It's a rhetorical question to spark conversation, not me asking for an actual percentage, to be clear. But like, what percentage of those people actually want their RPG experience to be streamlined?
I don't know.
It's interesting to consider, right? It's like, okay, for how many people is part of the appeal of Persona 5 that it's huge, right?
Yeah.
And not even
I would
that
like it to be shorter.
Well, Persona 5 is like an exaggeration of that, right? Persona 5 is like feels like almost a 150-hour game, right? But like for the core audience of this, for how many people is it like how many people actually want the games to be shorter? And then on the other hand, how many people don't play a game like that because they're afraid of how long it is? But then on the other hand, how much of what is good about these games actually relies on them being 50 plus hours as opposed to being more like 30, which I think this game is.
Yeah. So what made a lot of this game, the choices and the design choices and everything make sense to me is it is developed by a lot of the same team that made Tokyo Mirage Sessions, which I played like last year or something, the Switch port. Tokyo Mirage Sessions is like all about the Flash, essentially.
Yeah.
And
I watched you play some of that. I get that.
About making the player feel cool and like the colors and lots of cool stuff happening. And a little bit about like the characters and cultivating like a relatively small party that you use in battle as well. And all of that is very much how like what I'm getting from having looked at Soul Hackers, having played the first hour. It is very Tokyo Mirage Sessions, which I liked fine, right? I liked that game fine, and I think I will probably like this game fine. But they are very like they're different sort of. And I think that's why they talk about a little bit of like they implemented this Sabbath system in order to make like the player get like the cool parts of the combat a lot. And I think that it's interesting because I do think that's not what a lot of like the mainline SMT people are that hate themselves lovingly.
Yeah.
Like they're very like the difficulty of it, you know, the unfairness of it. And then you have Persona, which is more about like all the huge cast of characters, you know, that you can bond with. And this is definitely neither of those things. But it is also a little bit of both of them. So you get it does set itself up a little bit in the same way that I think Tokyo Mirage Sessions got when it released. It does sort of set itself up for criticism from both sides. Despite it trying to make its own identity in the center somewhere.
Well, I mean, as you discussed, this game, or the Devil Summoner / Soul Hackers series in general, and particularly the original Soul Hackers, was very much, when it came out in 1997, about, like, anxiety about the internet.
Yes.
Basically. So it was interesting to me. It's, like, very, on one hand, appropriate that it's now about AI. Although they don't really seem to have... They seem to more have used AI here as, like, technology is usually a theme in this series. And instead of having as dystopian a world as in the first one, we were more interested in creating an outsider who could, like, learn things about humans.
Yes.
But that's an especially interesting... Like, knowing that the first one was very much about... and in many prescient ways, about the way that the internet would take over and change society, right? It's now interesting in this particular moment that we are in, we have this game that's about AI, where the developers have been like, we actually really did not want it. We were not interested in telling the, like, does AI have a soul story?
Yes.
Because, like, there's a lot of that. We really just wanted to do it because, like, it gives us an outsider who can have a perspective on humans.
Yes.
So I was like, that's so interesting, especially right now, especially given the legacy of this series.
Yeah, this game, and from the developer interviews, generally seems a lot less anxious about it. Yeah. Which, I mean, perhaps that's just a result of it's already happened. You know?
They did say that. They said, we actually didn't feel like we could make a game where tech was, like, the villain anymore because, like, it's all here.
Yeah.
We're okay.
Yes.
And I was like, we'll see what you're saying in a couple of years. But Have you been on Twitter lately? But
Probably not.
Sure. Yeah.
What I do appreciate, and what I think I will continue to appreciate in playing it, is there's only your party is only 4 characters.
Yeah.
And there are a couple of characters that seem like they will have large roles but don't actually join you in the fighting. And I really like this.
Yeah.
It's nice to know that, like, this is my party, right? This is what I'm working with. And not be having to, like, balance, like, not have, like, group conversations where you're balancing, like, 10 different characters. I don't know. I've been playing Cold Steel 4.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's something that I think is also sort of uncommon among RPGs, especially turn-based RPGs and stuff. Is usually you end up having a party that's bigger than your main fighting force.
Yep.
I don't know. It's neat. It's a neat thing to just have, like, your dedicated squad, I guess.
Well, it's certainly more, I mean, I don't know. It's on one hand, it's more realistic. It's also, that is something that I don't always enjoy managing in games that have parties, is it's like I constantly feel like I'm never really playing with the party that I want to play with until maybe the very end of the game, where it doesn't matter anymore. It's just always like, oh, I have to make sure that this character doesn't fall behind. Like, gotta put them in the party, gotta swap them out. So, I appreciate that.
Gotta prioritize the social link that fixes that.
Exactly. Exactly. I would, you know, I have to mention that Jack Frost is in the game too.
He sure is. He's there.
Why do we all love Jack Frost?
He's perfect.
Question for the ages.
They did add some post updates that streamlined, like, Ringo can dash now in the dungeons, so she can move faster. They added the original Soul Hackers pixie design, which is dope as heck.
Nice.
So there and there've been, like, bug fixes and stuff. When it first came out, there were a few, like, problems that should now be perfectly fixed. So if you're waiting for that to get on Soul Hackers, it's on Game Pass.
I do have to throw out there that I saw at least a couple of articles, though, that seem to have genuine, like, you know how when any game comes out and then they release DLC, it's like, oh, like, you released an incomplete game.
Yeah,
but
I do.
Soul Hackers seems like people might actually have a case.
Yeah, so they did release paid day 1 DLC that includes some, like, bonus story stuff, essentially. Like a chunk of stuff. I don't know what it is, actually. I didn't look into it. But I do think people are a little bit getting nervous about this sort of precedent of doing that, or season passes that are clearly, like, already planned. And I mean, that's the case anyway. If they were making DLC, they probably have already planned it and started working on it by the time the game releases.
Of course.
But, yeah. So I get the anxiety of that.
Well, are you ready to mash?
Oh, last thing of what's notable about Soul Hackers 2.
I'm glad. I was afraid you weren't going to mention this. Go
ahead. The funniest quote. I was in Persona Central, had a bunch of translated interviews. I don't remember exactly which one this was that I was looking at. But I think it was Ishida. But one of the main developers, producers of this game, was saying, like, they really want players to pay attention to Ringo, because she is a female protagonist who speaks for herself, which is unprecedented. And if you added parentheses for the series.
I know. I saw another quote where they talked about that and they said, we want to keep switching things up on Atlas games and try things we've never tried before. Like, in reference to having a female main character. It's like, okay.
I know the who speaks for herself part is partly because a lot of SMT games have a silent protagonist, right?
Right.
Ringo
Still,
is voiced there you make a couple of choices for her that affects your bond level with your party members. But mostly she speaks, like they said, for herself. She's a voiced character who has her own personality. And a lot of SMT characters are just player projected things, essentially. So I get what they're trying to say there, but it is extremely funny phrasing. And Ringo rules, to put it out there so far. Ringo does, in fact, rule very hard. And I like her quite a bit. And she's got the character designs. I really do love the character designs. I know people thought they were, like, too flashy when they were announced, but you know what? I like that. Her sword, she has, like, cyber things going around her legs, and one of them comes off to be her sword during battle, which, objectively, I mean, come on. That's awesome. Come on.
Well, on that note, let's put her in ye old tank.
Yeah, put her in ye old tank. Yeah, of course.
All right. How do you want to mash these up?
There's tanks. There's got to be, well, tanks, mechs, robots, whatever.
Yeah, some kind of mech thing. It's got to be turn-based. You got a party. You got, like, a party in both of them. You had a party.
Yeah. Maybe it's something, this is Cold Steel 4. I'm sorry. But maybe there's something of, like, the mechs have, like, their sort of AI system, and then there's also sort of the pilot, right? And maybe it's sort of about the relationship there to sort of bring in, like, AI-human relationships from Soul Hackers 2.
I like that. I like the idea of kind of exploring the, like, okay, if the mech has consciousness or something, like, what are your ethical obligations when you're letting it get destroyed in battle, that kind of thing. I don't know how you then examine that in gameplay, though, because presumably you then just do some mech battle.
I think it'd be really cool if, like, I mean, I know this is, like, a thing that games do now, whatever, it's cliche, but I think it would be really cool if there was, like, a fight and then your mech started doing things, or trying to do things that you weren't trying to do. Like, sort of like a confusion state.
That does capture something, though, from Front Mission, which is that you don't get to choose what part of the opponent's mech to attack. So I think that's there in the source material. I think losing control in your mech making decisions for you. Yeah.
Maybe you could add some sort of system, like either like a relationship system or like a skill system or like a trust system or something.
Sure,
that's sort
of Pokemon gym badges.
Yeah, well, sort of like that, yeah. But like, how much do you get your mech like beat up, you know, versus how much do you try to make sure it doesn't get totally totaled? Right. Or like, what is your like general sort of relationship with your mech? Whatever.
Yeah. But then I feel like different mechs would like want different things, right? Like you have to have at least one. Like the tank mech kind of wants to get beat up.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
Right. So like that could be interesting too. Is like part of the strategy is, you know, like you in this you'd have to have stats for like you have to have like pilot stats and mech stats.
Yeah.
Right. And you would have to be able to choose, like kind of like the demons, right?
Yeah,
kind of like choosing your demon.
Yeah.
Which is a little weird though, because it's like, wouldn't you want your pilot to have like a mech? You wouldn't want to be switching it out too much. So you'd have to think about it. But like then the mechs would also have to have like opinions about parts, right? It's like you can swap out all your parts. And so it's like, I mean, obviously there has to be a core part that remains, although that could also be an ethical thing the game could explore is it, I mean, whatever, this is such like philosophy 101 stuff here, but it's like once you've swapped out, whose boat is it? Is it Odysseus? It's not Odysseus's boat. I'm gonna have to look this up real quick. There's like the classic thought experiment where when you have the boat and you've swapped out over time you've swapped out all the wood in the boat, and like, is it still the same boat? I wonder if I Google, is it still the same boat? Will it come up?
Ship of Theseus.
Thank you.
I did think that was funny. Obviously, I read this and I was like, oh yeah, duh. Like, one of the inspirations for some of Soul Hackers 2 was Nier Automata. And also John Wick, by the way.
Sure.
Uh,
Put John Wick in a mech.
Put John Wick in it. That's a free idea. What are they on, 5? Next one's 5 or something? John Wick 5? John Wick in a mech?
Michael B. Jordan will be the one to do that first. Creed will be in a mech.
I hope Creed's
next
in a
time.
mech.
He'll be doing like the boxing Rock'em Sock'em Robot.
Yes, I was thinking of the Ship of Theseus. They talked about in an interview that like they were thinking a little bit about Nier Automata of Soul Hackers too.
Yeah,
very funny to play games out of Japan every once in a while and be like, "Oh, you played Nier Automata." I see.
Interesting.
I've noticed.
Well, I feel like we got something to this like turn-based updated mecha combat with a mech with a mind of its own. The social link system with your mech.
Yeah.
That'd be pretty good. I can support that. Hope you can make your mechs bond with each other. That would be dope.
That would be cool.
In addition to the pilots bonding with each other. That'd be cool.
Yeah.
Well, folks, have you played either the original or the new versions of Front Mission? Or of Soul Hackers / Soul Hackers 2? Are you a woman who enjoys either strategies or robots, or who enjoys speaking up for yourself? I don't know. Do you think front fishing has a future?
Yeah.
I'm gonna put fishing. There'll be a fishing minigame in ours that we'll call front fishing as kind of a little homage. Anyway, if you have thoughts on any of that or anything else we talked about this week, hit us up on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Talk This Podcast. You can also visit our website, www.talkthispodcast.com, where you can read all about the show, check out the games that are in the hat, or Emma's got to pull our next 2 games for the main edition, and read our blog featuring long-running series Clickbait Boyfriend and Split Screen. But most importantly, if you enjoyed the show, you should subscribe. We are on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, Pandora Podcasts, online and on the app, Overcast, Pocket Cast, wherever you find podcasts, wherever you found the podcast today, subscribe to Talk This. Next week it's a side quest. It's Emma's turn.
We'll see.
It'll sure be something.
Front fishing.
But what are we going to be talking about in 2 weeks?
For our old game, we are going to be talking about Trine.
Cool.
And for our new game, we are going to be talking about, we haven't done Signalis yet, right?
I don't think so.
Signalis. And Emma's going to remember to update the hat.
The hat must be getting pretty sparse.
I think
the
there's
one
like
on the website.
2 more in each of them after this poll, so
this
definitely
is a good
time for an
opportunity.
update.
If you have games you want in the hat, send them to Emma. Send them to her.
Exactly.
Well, that's our show. Thanks for listening. Emma, do you have a good sign-off this week?
This week, I hope that you get along well with your electronic appliances.